Welcome back from your break. Our first panel is Women Waging War, moderated by Dr. Mary Raum. Dr. Mary Raum is the professor in National Security Affairs Department at the Naval War College, where she's also teaches history of women in war and combat elective. She is the founder of the WPS chair at the Naval War College, as the provost mentioned, and served in this capacity from 2009 to 2016. Her forthcoming book is entitled Art, Artifact, Women, and War, will be published this fall. Please give a warm round of applause for Dr. Raum.
Hey, good morning, everyone. And I'm really pleased to be your panel moderator for this morning for Women Waging War. First of all, please silence your electronic equipment if you have any of that on so that our panelists can go through their discussions freely without interruption. So we do have 4 outstanding panelists, of which you may see their remarkable bios in the program, who are both here in person and virtually, representing independent scholarship, the Institute of World Politics, Quaid-i-Azam University, and the Inouye Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies. We're going to open with Dr. Christopher Harmon's discussion on the Tamil Tigresses. Then Dr. Namrata Goswami will present on female Indian insurgents, followed by Shabana Fayyaz on female radicalization in Pakistan. Then end with, did you pronounce your name? Nami, thank you. Nami W. Byrd's talk on the revolution in Myanmar. So each panel will be given 15 minutes to present, and then we will open for questions for the last 15 minutes. I request that panelists abide by the time frame, and I'll notify you at about 13-minute mark so that you can come up with some concluding statements. So Dr. Harmon.
Thank you, and good morning to you. My paper, although lengthy, will be summarized briefly, and the setting is the following. It's in Sri Lanka. The paper is focused on one particular commander, an insurgent leader on the political side of an important movement, and her manual, which she's written and which has been somewhat neglected. So again, it's a rather narrow paper. The scene is in Sri Lanka. The years are sort of 1972 to 2009 in the most broad range, although she leaves before the end of the war. The situation in Sri Lanka is one of tremendous ethnic and sometimes religious tension. The Tamil minority out of which she is a partisan is perhaps 17% of the population, and against a majority which is Sinhalese and largely Buddhist. Other factors that are important in this is a 1983 catastrophe in which there was a kind of informal pogrom against Tamils by the majority, which did a lot to militarize the situation. And before that, an effort by the majority, the Sinhalese, to basically sidebar Tamil language as an official speech that's a part of the regular governmental business as well as culture in Sri Lanka. There are a lot of other factors which I try to get to in a somewhat long chapter. The Tamil nationalist movement then arises in the early and mid 1970s, and they sort of shove aside the more pacific or moderates, as many of these movements do. And the violence then is led in the end by the LTTE Tigers, the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam. The leader is Vallupillai Prabhakaran, and it becomes one of the most powerful of all modern insurgencies at a sub-state level. They have separate branches of martial service. They have well-trained infantry with very strong morale. There are training grounds in India as well as Sri Lanka. Good logistics, armorers, an international effort to procure weapons and money for the fight, sophisticated media, and all the rest. The open warfare begins from about 83 onward. And in the end will take something like 80,000 to 100,000 lives, perhaps more. The decision to involve women in all this is made by male leadership. Of course, it's a fairly despotic organization by Prabhakaran. The woman who's involved from the outside, who's intriguing and who's done this manual, is Adele and Balasingham, who also happens to be married to the top diplomat in the movement. So that's the sort of setting. The author is then a lady from Australia. Adele Ann Wilby is her maiden name. She's introduced to the organization by her husband after they met and married. The effort is, on her part, is one that's highly political and one that's somewhat cerebral. She does a number of books, but especially the manual I want to emphasize for today, the Women's Fighters for Liberation, Elam. She doesn't hold particular power, this lady, but she does hold great repute. So her assigned positions aren't all that clear all the time, but she does an immense amount of work for and with the leadership. She emphasizes in her autobiography, a second book, in these early days of the growth of the movement, I was the only woman with access to the leadership and its internal dynamics. Certainly, I haven't ever studied one in this movement who outranked her on the of the females. The manual, then, the manual was published in 1993. It was released under the authority of the organization, so it's very much official. It's about 40 pages long. It includes a number of different sections. There are some maps. There are some photographs of female commanders, not her, but we have pictures of her from her autobiography and from various magazine and news sources. The manual does not emphasize recruitment so much, but it does give a great deal of emphasis to training. That training occurred for women within Sri Lanka and also within India. The Balasingham Manual, then, Women Fighters for Liberation Tigers, takes up a number of themes. I want to mention four just quickly. One is certainly that already political efforts were made by the Tamil militants and non-militant politicos, and these failed and therefore justify a turn to violence. It's a central and early argument in the training manual, and to me it does seem absolutely vital because the group is known for some horrific terrorism, some astonishing terrorism. And so she's laying the groundwork, I think, by suggesting that earlier pacific efforts had not sufficed. A second point is the oppression of women in Sri Lanka, in her view. She calls it a patriarchal culture, in which religious and ethnic majoritarian tendencies were always against Tamil women, who were, of course, very much outnumbered. The point then with this force, this new force, was to sort of flip the odds. And the author claims that opportunities and horizons which would never have entered the minds of Tamil women a decade ago are now open. Normally, young women remain under the control of their father or brother, and male control follows them throughout their lives. A third point that Adele Balasingham makes has to do with feminism and personal liberation. If any of you know the work of Frantz Fanon, who explored some of the female belligerents in the Algerian Civil War, he pioneered that kind of approach in thinking and openly writing about that psychological dimension of it in Algeria. This manual makes no reference to it, but that's her line as well. Women must, she says, rupture the sexual division of labor and otherwise break some of the pieties of the society. Fourth, and equally strongly, she argues for Tamil nationalism. She wants it to get a chance. She insists that Sri Lanka is not a democracy, and in fact is a place where state terror is commonplace. Tamil nationalism will be some kind of solution to this. Her strategy in the manual is very interesting. It's a rather smart military strategy. She never quotes or cites any particular theorist, but I think there's a number of ways in which she's a bit like Mao in terms of strategy more than politics. She shows that strong emphasis upon needing to grow from weakness into strength. She addresses protracted warfare explicitly. She talks about the use of guerrilla war, but also the expansion of that into semi-conventional forms of warfare and even fully conventional offensive. So while we probably wouldn't call her a Maoist, she is somewhat Maoist-like with respect to strategy. In her force planning, the manual argues very strongly that the woman's force must be separate. She wants to see trained and worked and politicized and prepared a force which would have a separate structure. There are also groups in the Tamil insurgency which are integrated, but her point is to make sure that the women have a definite place of their own which can't be taken away from them. In military skills, naturally, it's insurgency fighting that's most mentioned, but there are a slew of others, maybe a dozen, which make it into the manual. She sees a position for communications equipment, for battlefield medicine, for women doing military reconnaissance, intelligence work, technical work with weapons. She's rather proud of the notion that women would be very good in reconnaissance, and emphasizes that they can withstand the Spartan conditions and do meticulous study of the opposition, and that in fact the casualty rate of the Sri Lankan military shows the effectiveness of these women. There was one unit called Truth Tigers, which was their media arm, which is quite fascinating because they had not only radio, but even television for a while in the movement, and women were closely involved in that. She certainly underscores the difficulty of living in the jungle and in doing the brutish work that's more commonly associated with male conscripts or volunteers or members of a movement. Mining, construction, being porters, she gets in rather deeply to all that. There's one sort of unusual literary flourish where she said, in this business, dust replaces talcum powder. And she emphasizes how truly hard a lot of the physical work is in building embankments and various barracks and bunkers and such. And again, she has a considerable work to say, effort to speak to the amount of physical effort all this would take. In terms of her impact, she wants the reader to know, those who are coming into the movement to know how truly high a price they'll pay for national liberation struggle. She gives you case after case of named women belligerents and commanders and such, who she sort of builds up and sometimes with a tragic touch, then snatches away from the reader with a suggestion of how bloody this struggle is and how many women are dying and how they must lose the fear of dying. The manual creates then and presents a number of legends. She claims they do extremely well and in fact boasts that as against the Indian government, which sent forces, she says the women from the Tamil movement have confronted the opposite sex in fierce battles, suffered badly, but shocked the arrogant, male, chauvinistic, and powerful Indian army when that had come in as a peacekeeping force at the end of the 80s. Some women are captured rather than dying in battle. Of course, they wore the cyanide vial about which so much has been written, and many others surrendered, in fact, at the end of the war without taking that. Some did take the cyanide. In short, this movement pays a high price in blood for its choices strategically. We're looking at a movement that did consider certain political options, but never took them very far, limited forms of nationalism or federalism. Negotiations were widespread in this conflict during that long stretch, but the leadership of the Tigers never took them sufficiently seriously. There was international mediation, which wasn't able to help. So in the end, the fight ends in a very conventional way with exceedingly high casualties. In the last year alone, quite a few women perished and quite a few of the guerrillas perished in the conclusion of the war. It's too short a form here. I don't want to steal from my partners on the panel to discuss too much more of the impact or the aftermath. I wish to say this about the aftermath. I think the most striking thing of all for this society is that at the end of a war, which was in part racial and in part religious and very much divided the country and took fantastic casualties. By the end, the problem seems to me to be to turn from a victorious state or what we might call the state of Sri Lanka and consider it again to be as a nation. It seems to me the nations were divided in the long insurgency. The divide was lethal. And the challenge now for the government, having won the war, the challenge is to sort of re-knit that sense of nationhood. They have tried with various programs. I got to interview a woman named Mal Hederachichi, who helped run some of them. She talked about their professionalism, their compassion, their discipline, their security. Those programs for rehabilitation and reconciliation, however, have had many critics as well. It's a hard slog. But the closing point would just be that we tend in this country, I guess, when we get news of this part of the world, to focus on either the political leaderships, which come and go, or more recently, the economic tragedy that's embraced the country. And I think the larger problem will be for any government, whatever the party, will be to extend that magnanimous hand to the Tamils after their defeat in this insurgency. Because it's only good and proper attention to nation building and not just perpetuation of a state that seems to me to be the greatest challenge now. It's going to take magnanimity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Harmon. The other thing that you should know about Dr. Harmon is he has published on this, and I encourage you to look into some of the items that you can find. Thank you for keeping the time too. I'm going to move on in terms of the schedule and go to Dr. Goswami next. I believe it's virtual.
No, it's me.
Oh, that's you. Okay.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for having me, and it's a real honor to be here at the U.S. Naval War College. So what I'm going to speak today in the 7 minutes I have is to talk about a conflict that is one of the oldest insurgent conflicts in Asia, which is the National Socialist Council of Nagalim. Nagalim in Nagamese means homeland. And the Nagas are a minority population in Northeast India. And so if you see this particular map, that's where they're located. And they comprise about 2.21 million of a population of 1.4 billion. But what is very important about the Naga conflict is that it started in 1918, even before India became independent in 1947. And the reason why the Naga conflict has continued till today, it's an active conflict. And basically, the negotiations are at the level of the Indian Prime Minister. So there is a lot of importance given to resolving this conflict. And so there are three reasons why the Naga conflict came about. One is that Nagas historically saw themselves as different from the rest of India. Second, the whole conflict is about political representation and ethnic minority representation. And the final reason is that they do want an independent, separate state outside of India. The conflict has been very violent at times. Since 1997, the Indian government has instituted negotiations with the Naga group. Until today, resolution has not been found because of the conflicting and confrontational issue of sovereignty. So what do you mean by Naga sovereignty? Now, the work that I do, the one research question that I had that brought me to the panel today is that within the Naga insurgent group, what I wanted to find out was that what is the role of women? And the question I had when I went for field work for over 10 years is to see where do women locate themselves in this group? Are they just combatants that are carrying out the operational and ideological narrative that male leaders put forward? Or are they actually part of the decision making at the highest level? How do they see themselves in terms of the conflict and what kind of influence they have, not just in the Naga conflict, but also in the entire Naga population. Now, the important thing again to remember is that there is the juxtaposition of modernity and tradition in this particular conflict. So there are 5 important frames through which I see this conflict. One is that in my fieldwork, when I asked the women members of the group, what did they see themselves as in part of the group? So what was interesting was that they articulated 4 or 5 reasons why they joined a group. One is that they said it offered them employment. So they got employment. The group pays a particular salary to their members. Second, women saw that as a bonding with the entire society and with the insurgent members that they saw as their ethnic kin. So the word insurgent was never used. It was either my brother or my uncle or a family member or a friend. So it's a very interesting narrative, which I kind of pointed out to the Indian government as well, that the narrative changes when you talk to the insurgent group. The third reason why women joined was personal and physical security. These are very deeply conflict-affected areas. And because there was the absence of governance, and I also come from that particular area, so the women members articulated that that was a big reason why they joined. And then the final reason why they joined was also bonding with a particular male member. So they already had some kind of relationship for which they actually joined the group. Now, these were the antecedent conditions of joining, but then it changed once they were part of the group. So once they actually became a member of the group and spent certain years, and these are women within the age group of 15, they start very young, to the age group of 25. And then after that, they tend to be moved out to more support function. So when it came to direct function, what was interesting was that once they became a part of the group, the women tended to see themselves as buying into the narrative and the ideology of the National Socialist Council of Nagalim, which is a separate homeland. When they joined, they didn't have that as much in terms of joining. There were different reasons why they were joining. Now, what did the group do about it? So this was interesting. So in my fieldwork, what I did was that I went to the People's Consultative Group that the NSC and IM puts out, which is within the ceasefire camp. These are very remote areas in Northeast India, close to the India-Burma border. And so I had consultations with the group leaders. What I saw was that in those consultations, the leaders themselves, who were all male, tended to talk to me, but wouldn't include the women in the highest talk table. So they would talk to me about their movement, their passion, why they came about, but the women were not involved in talking to me directly at the highest level. So when I would actually ask for talking to the women, then they would send me out to the field where they were training. They were training for becoming military snipers, for example. They were very good at that, for guerrilla operations. They were very good at intelligence gathering. They were very good at creating social networks. So then when they allowed me to talk to the women, what was interesting was that the women saw their role as really critical as well, despite the fact that they were not part of the political decision making. They saw that as agency given. I never asked them leading questions. So I would never ask them a question like, do you want to be a part of a political group? Because I knew traditionally that could be difficult for them to process at times. And so when I asked them that, what do you think about the group's ideology? What do you think about your own role? They actually felt pretty empowered being a combatant or being a low-level combatant commander. And they never actually, interestingly, questioned the fact that none of them were involved in the highest level of political decision-making. And I'll explain to you why this is the case. And so the final interesting investigation I did was that, so, okay, fine, this is how the insurgent group is constituted. What about tradition and modernity? And which is what all of you responded to today. In the survey, 205 of you said that culture and tradition plays a critical role in women membership. And this gets reflected in my 10-year study of collecting data among insurgent camps. So when it comes to the stature of women in Naga society, which is a very traditional society, which does not reflect some of the constitutional obligation of India, which requires you to have 33% representation in government bodies. The Naga State Assembly, which is a 60-member assembly, has never elected a woman. They're very much patriarchal in thinking. When there was a Supreme Court decision that you have to have 33% representation, there was a huge protest in the Naga areas against this particular ruling. So that particular framing, the pressure of modernity with tradition comes in when you think about the insurgent group as well. And so when I talked to the women, they kind of accepted that particular role, but not all of them. There were some who later talked to me and said that, why is it that I was not involved in the table where you were asking those questions? Because I have a lot to say as to where the conflict is going wrong. We should not be negotiating with the Indian government because they're not giving us sovereignty. We should be very clear about it. Then I realized they had very strong perspectives. And whether this got reflected with the male colleagues or their leaders, it was very hard to find out because people wouldn't give you direct answers. And this is something of a learning and humbling lesson for me as a conflict researcher, that I can go there with certain theoretical frameworks, certain understanding of peace and conflict. But when it comes to local complexities, the understanding of gender roles, it is very difficult to navigate it at times. And people can take offense sometimes in the questions you ask. And you have to always keep that in mind. And then finally, I'll show you this particular pictorial depiction. So once I studied the motivation of women insurgent members and low-level leaders, then looked at whether they took part in political decision-making at the highest level of the group, the answer was no. But that did not mean they did not have agency and did not feel ownership about the movement. They were actually very surprised that I was out there in the remote areas wanting to hear their perspective and wanting to talk about what their passion and their desire for the Naga ethnic representation should be. But then in 2015, the government of India offered a final framework resolution to the group, which meant that after nearly 100 years of fighting, there has to be a recognition of Naga history and Naga ethnic minority representation at the highest level. But then if you see that particular picture, which is there, you don't see a single woman. So this is the entire political leadership of the group. I've spoken to most of them. And what is interesting is that they did not include even the lower level squadron leader at the highest political decision making. And this might seem symbolic. Some might question that maybe they actually have ownership and power, but this kind of pictures have an impact on younger women and girls, because I do have students from that area who see this picture and say that, yes, but we are not involved in the highest level of negotiation and decision making. And neither were they involved in the final framing of the conflict that happened. And so I will end by saying in my presentation here that there are three key findings when you think about conflict affected areas. I also study the Boko Haram. I study the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, and I teach at the Joint Special Forces University. And the one thing I notice is that the way women actually can play a role in insurgent groups, despite the fact that they're not involved in decision making, is to create networks through their strengths. So this is what I saw the Naga women do. One was that they were very good as commandos and as short-range snipers, very good at that. They showed me, they actually were so proud. They took me to their training and felt very proud about the fact that they were good at guerrilla warfare, guerrilla operations, intelligence, and social network. So because they were so good at that, they were actually able to talk to the highest level of leadership to include some of the women issues. So it was their expertise that brought them the recognition within the group. And then the second important thing is that they cannot escape modernity and tradition. Despite the fact that we from outside might want them to have more power and more role, because societal structures are so constructed that it's very difficult sometimes, even if you want to come out of the traditional structure, because it is very male dominated. And finally, even if there is constitutional mechanism, and that is why when we talk about UNSC resolution, where the first point is whether they are included in decision making, that might not sometimes get operationalized on the ground. And so I'm sorry, I have very less time. So if you're really interested in learning about the Naga conflict, I just published a book with Oxford. It's called The Naga Ethnic Movement for a Separate Homeland, which details the entire conflict from my fieldwork. And please get it. I think you'll be interested in it. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Goswami. I'd also like to do a little pause here. We have anthropology and fieldwork. This is so essential to the WPS program. So I think if you're looking for some really fascinating and frontline information, these two individuals' work is just exceptional for that. Okay, so let's move on. Are we going virtual now? Dr. Fayyaz?
Yes, please. Hi, everybody. I hope you're seeing my screen, and it's a part of a bit of research work that I've been engaged for more than a decade or so, when I was engaged in my PhD work on Pakistan's response towards terrorism. Female radicalization is as such a subject that is much not talked about in all the facts or the books or the debates that have come up from the policy circles. And this was something you might have been hearing, the few BLA girls exploding themselves and others. But unfortunately, when you talk to the countering violence extremism people, so then it becomes a bit of a delicate subject to speak on. But nevertheless, that subject of thinking has changed overnight, over the time, and now people like us are making efforts to recognize the fact that the female radicalization in Pakistan is not something that is all pervasive, or it is not something that should be neglected. In fact, what this paper basically means is, or what is my aim has been, that there is an external perception regarding Pakistan that females are turning into the bombs. And if one girl explodes, the whole people like us, the majority of the women, are seen as one with a negative eye. So this has happened in front of the Chinese embassy, even one of the closest friends of Pakistan. And it is something that tarnishes the image of the country and the women, and brings a big question mark of the future young generation traveling for education purpose and the other pursuits. So my idea is basically number one, to point out that it is a complex subject. Why it is complex? Because it is contextual in nature. Now, I have been doing and engaged for this study as well, an empirical gathering evidence, and for that have been carrying out the off-record direct interactions with the female seminaries head who have been involved and are involved in perpetuating the certain mindset that rejects the constitution of Pakistan and that calls the actions of Pakistan government or army as an unlawful and an un-Islamic steps. So basically what it means is, one of my key is that we need to have, why I have taken Jamia Hafsa case. This is a picture that gathered a lot of international spotlight in 2007 and have been given an access to interview these girls who left before the Operation Silence, and also the lady who still is doing her work and may be not violent but perpetuating a certain mindset. So the image, if you see, is the burqa clad women with the sticks. The stick is seen as the force here it is portrayed as a force to protect themselves according to their version, and to also protect the society, which they believe should be cleansed and be a purely Islamic state according to their version of Islam. So this is something I think this Jamia Hafsa is the one of the only case in the history of Pakistan's counterterrorism kinetic operations where a first time an operation was launched against the Lal Masjid, that was the male part, and its affiliated Jamia Hafsa, because what is happening was that these were trying to encroach the government land or the state land, and also trying to question the behavior of the citizens of the country, then according to them were the un-Islamic, and they had a moral responsibility to cleanse it. Now, why this came about? Very interesting, as has been discussed earlier in Dr. Goswami interpretation was, yes, the patriarchal circle, influence is very much there. And this is one key point when you talk to the people who were involved and are involved in the certain view of life, they themselves, they're very proud of being associated with the groups who were at time involved in the so-called jihad, whether it was in Afghanistan and whether it was beyond. And in this case, what we see is, having interviewed the male part as well, the women role has actually been the human shields. And they were seen, the women were basically, they become the willing or unwilling agent of violence in the name of religion and ideology. So what it really boils down is that that in case of Jamia Hafsa, it is very interesting to note. I don't have time to go into all the intricacies or the complex elements that were in place when the operation was undertaken. Female radicalization trends in Pakistan is of very complex nature. It can be violent at times, and it can be passive at times. And as we all know that in the world of research of this terrorism or kinetic means to influence the society by the non-state actors, the sleeper cells are the most dangerous part of any non-state actor, specifically for the people of the country who reside in a particular area. So if you see that they are the aim of female radicalized institutions, it is not that only madrasas are the radicalized one. One of the interesting takeaway was it is distributed all over the country and even beyond the borders. For instance, in one of the interactions, the women of the Taliban or the families of Khan Talibans who were living in Pakistan, and because we have the border, together, and the half of the families are also divided, they are also being the students of certain seminaries. And so there is an interconnections, and also from other Muslim countries. So this is a thought pattern that flows. But whether these thought patterns all the time go for the violence, this is a big question. For if you, in having interaction with the Jamia Hafsa that exists even today, although being uprooted from its present, where it was attacked, or it was where the operation was launched, it has more than 17 to 30 female seminaries that are associated with them. They say the force or the violence was not a matter of choice. It was imposed on us. So this is, for me, this was a great learning experience, because it clearly shows that there were a lot of distance between what the government was perceiving the threat or calling it as a terrorist threat versus what the people or the women of the country perceived that. And unfortunately, after 9/11, what happened was that General Musharraf was seen as the agent of the West. Now the US has withdrawn, the Taliban, Afghan Talibans are running the scene in Kabul. But again, if you talk to these sort of Jamia Hafsa affiliated seminaries, and even in some of the public sector female institutes, you see them as portraying, the Afghan model as one of the healthiest model. And this is actually a big shock for the women like us, and specifically the majority of the women in Pakistan, or the females in Pakistan, who are very moderate, who are keen learners, who are entrepreneurs, and who want to be on the, are already at the international spotlight on business, education, arts, cultures, writing, or medical profession, or whatever. So this is my key point, is that we have to understand, when we are talking about countering violent extremism, the women have to be in the driving seat. I have done being engaged in certain civil society organizations, and as a peace trainers, and as a part of the community training enterprises. That is, that women are the one who have the key to the peace. But this does not mean that men don't have a place. Actually, it means is that there has to be a partnership, not only in instituting the plan, but also in crafting the plan of the countering violent extremism. And this brings me back to the fact that what we see as the WPS whole program or idea of the UN 1325, that whole idea is, that is, resolution is that the women or the female are the agency of peace. For Pakistan, I think the challenge is to be an agency of peace, how to give women an equal opportunities. And these opportunities are not only economic in nature, these are legal in nature, where you perceive a society, women as sacred or as a safe place to live in, where the women don't feel afraid where they are living in. They get tired to the different groups, as has been discussed earlier, because of achieving the sense of security, the sense of empowerment. So all these influencing, and who is going to do it? For me, the answer is not only state. It has to be the state and society partnership. And here it brings me back to my final line is that we need to reframe the countering violent extremism being half being kinetic and more being non-kinetic. And that basically means that we need to have a holistic framework of security. And that security should not be a national security. Security also implies looking into security within a state and beyond the state. So I will end here, and we're looking forward to have your feedback in future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Fayyaz. So that talk is a very interesting one because she really hits on the 4 pillars of WPS kind of in one situation in a case study. The other thing that's intriguing about the talk, and that I think is an important element of Women, Peace, and Security, is that she does mention education. And that's an imperative in most of these societies. And the society-state partnership. So thank you very much, Dr. Fayyaz. If you can, please stay online because we'll have a question set after the final panelist.
Sure.
Next, we have Dr. Byrd. Hey, Dr. Byrd, I can see you.
So
Good.
shall I share my PowerPoint?
I'm sorry, would you repeat that?
Can I share my PowerPoint now?
Yes, you should be able to.
Okay. All right. Can everybody see this?
We can see it.
Okay. All right. Aloha, everybody. It's a little bit early for me here in Honolulu, Hawaii. And so if I appear a little bit sleepy, that is the reason. So thank you for inviting me to speak today on this panel. I'm very honored. And today, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about also my ongoing research relating to women in the front line fighting for democracy in Myanmar. So before Myanmar, or formerly known as Burma, whenever I talked about Myanmar or Burma, it's, people usually don't know where that is and why we should even care about it. So I wanted to put in a little bit larger strategic context and relevance of Myanmar, right? So here is Myanmar. It's at the it's a mainland Southeast Asia country. Believe it or not, it is the largest country in mainland Southeast Asia, has direct border with China. So it's at the step of China. And it is historically known as the China's back door to the Indian Ocean, because Myanmar is the only country that has a direct border with China that is on the western end of the Malacca Strait, right? Malacca Strait is one of the most important strategic strait for trade, global trade and everything else, right? So there it is. And Myanmar also has the 2,000 kilometer of coastline. So Myanmar EEZ is almost as big as the country, right? And then, here I said land bridge to the Indian Ocean for China. And Myanmar was the only democracy in mainland Southeast Asia. And of course, it had a military coup in February 2021. So that in post-coup environment, the resistance, fighter, pro-democracy resistant forces that are trying to restore democracy in Myanmar is what I'm going to talk about. But I just wanted to make sure you understand that. And then also how important Myanmar is to overall China, because all the historically major power that want to dominate Asia always needed Myanmar, right? So that's why British had Myanmar. And then Japanese wanted Myanmar, and today China really need Myanmar because of that backdoor to the Indian Ocean. It solves Malacca dilemma for China because 80% of China's energy needs go through the Malacca Strait. So they're always worried that in time of war that we would choke, we would close down the Malacca Strait. So where it's trying to get is that the western end of Malacca Strait through Myanmar, because as you can see, Myanmar leading to the mouth of Malacca Strait, and the eastern end is the South China Sea or the West Philippine Sea. So that's the context I wanted to put in the larger strategic competition, how Myanmar sits, right? So 2021, the coup happened. The Myanmar military threw out the democratically elected government and the whole country rise up against it. So as of just in December, we did the survey across the country, and 91% of the people, the respondent, reject the military. Even after 2 years of pain and suffering, because military has violently cracked down all the protesters. But people are still, rejecting the military. And the protest started out very peacefully, but military brutal crackdown, right, has transformed the resistance, the protests into armed resistance. And, this is a slide showing you that the resistant forces that are countering the anti-junta, countering the military, is 65% women. 65% women. So that is really unusual, right? And why? Why is that? Why are women involved? Well, 10 years of democratic transition prior to the coup, right? A lot of the 8 packages came into Myanmar had women, peace and security, or some type of a women empowerment programs. And that and as a result, also that 10 years of a transition to democracy, women gain a lot of rights, right? And under the military regime of nearly 70 years, women has lost their rights, a lot of their rights. So they regain somewhat in that 10 years, and as well as they were, these empowerment program really increased their capability and capacity. So when this coup occurred, one, they said they don't want to go back to the dark days, right? And two, they now understand that political arena is relevant to them. In the past, Myanmar culture and tradition, women do not get involved in politics. Well, because one, it was a military rule, so military, is male. Purely not male dominated, is a purely male organization, right? So that's one of the things they felt like it's not relevant to them. But in that tenure, they start to see that political system make decision for the entire society, right? And if you're not at the table, their perspective and their needs are not considered. So, and they understood that. So that's why they're now they feel that that the political arena is relevant to them, and then they think that they have the capacity and capability to do this. So that's why they're participating in it, right? And here, and many of them are in the online arena attacking the military, and they are also the primary group of people that are mobilizing and keeping the population mobilized using a lot of stratcom strategy. They seems to many of the women that I interview, they seems to almost innately understand how to use stratcom to keep the people, communicate with the people to keep them mobilized. And so here are some of the women online that are, mobilizing people. And this young woman over here, she is a major fundraiser. overnight, she when she fundraised overnight, she can raise millions of dollars. So and they're raising it through a lot of diaspora, Myanmar diaspora. In this particular time, Myanmar diaspora across the globe is also mobilized, and again, the work of these women as well, and they're utilizing social media to do that. And so this young woman, she raised like $4 million within 24 hours for anti-air drones. Because, as you know, just recently, Myanmar military has been bombing the villages because they can no longer win on the ground. And so they're using the air strikes to destroy the villages, innocent civilians. That's the only way they can put fear back into the people. But instead, instead of fear, people are very angry. And every time they bomb people, it increased their resolve to resist the military and fight back. And all of that work is also, many of them are being done by women. Women make sure that people understand that. So here are some of the, not only women are in the logistics and StratCom arena, but they also are on the ground actually participating. So here are these are mine makers, because they don't have enough firepower. So all they can, most of the way they try to slow down the military attacks is using mines, right? Using mines in their convoys and trapping with mines. So, and they were saying, when I was interviewing some of them, they said that they start making mines because a lot of the men, they don't want to do that. They just want to go out in the front line and shoot. But they knew, the women said, mines are more effective than their little, musket rifles that they have. So they started making mines, and they said they don't mind doing that. So in overall, what's unusual about this particular uprising, Myanmar has a lot of uprising in the past against the military, but this uprising specifically unusual because of the women participation. And because of the women participation, it brings in a lot of innovative ways and non-lethal way to attack the military, actually. And as a result, military is losing grounds. As of right now, military control less than half of the country. Less than half of the country. Other half is being controlled by ethnic armed organizations and People Defense Forces and the National Unity Government. These are all coalition of resistance forces. And why? It is one of the reasons is the women are coming up with strategies and tactics that are, they may be non-lethal, but they're very effective. They're very effective. But challenges, there's still challenges for the women. Despite their majority, many women are not represented in the leadership and decision maker level. So we should, because there's 60%, 65% participation at the leadership level, we should see about 65% as well, right? But no, like at the NUG, National Unity Government, this is the opposition, to restore democracy entity. They have 17 ministries, and out of 17 ministries, only 3 are women. And then, so here is the opportunity is in 2022, U.S. Congress passed National Defense Authorization Act with the Burma Act inside of it, right? It's authorized U.S. to provide non-lethal assistance to all the pro-democracy forces, right? And one of the line of effort that I think we can make headway is in using WPS as a line of effort under the Defense Authorization Act. Because women, when I interview both men and women, I interview men and women, fighters, and women totally they absolutely innately understand that you need to keep the population on your side. And they find the most creative way to communicate with the constituent in their area to keep them mobilized and provide support. And because of that support, they're able to keep a lot of the forces, secure and save lives. And one of the thing is, as soon as this whole coup happened, and then when military started bombing villages, the women came to me and said, what can we do to keep people safe? We need early warning system so that we can evacuate the elderly, children, and disabled people. So they bring in a bunch of women groups that are a part of women and maternal health network. And then, I taught them a little bit how to, surveil and how to, how to do a little bit of surveil and intelligence work so that they can have a lot early warning to evacuate. And now they have saved so many lives. And that network has become the basis for the intelligence gathering for the combat operation for the resistance forces at this moment, right? But it started out with the women maternal health, and their focus was to trying to keep people safe. But that has turned into, because that was the only network that they had from the pro-democracy side to get information passed along. So anyway, so this is opportunities for us. And again, overall, back to strategic competition, there's a competition of two system, authoritarian system and democratic system, right? And Myanmar is right in the front line. In the front line to keep democracy are the tip of the spear is the women. So I think that I hope I can I make the case for the WPS, how WPS can be used more effectively, not just as a feel-good thing, but as an operational effectiveness for us. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Byrd. If you could also please stay online because we're going to open this up to students. But what I think you've got here was 4 incredible perspectives on women waging war around the world in 4 different parts of the globe. So I want to thank you all for bringing the information before the student body. I think it's essential in the WPS program. And I'm going to turn it over to you for the questions.